Hi, domo minasan. Yeah, let's never do that again in an English video. Welcome to yet another episode of Type Moon Character Showcase. For those who don't know, this is a series where I take a character from the Nasuverse and present them to you all. I start by going over their lore and character, before going over their abilities, and finishing up with my personal thoughts. Again, there will be time codes in the description should you need it to skip spoilers or anything. As I stated before, the character choices will not be limited by obscurity whatsoever. Any character that existed in Type Moon has a chance to be covered, as a goal of mine is to share to all you viewers the amazing and interesting characters that Type Moon has to offer, some which you might not know everything about, or some you just don't know at all. However, this episode, we'll be breaking on more mainstream ground with someone most of you should be familiar with. Speaking of which, today's character is the one and only Shirou Emiya. Most people need no introduction to Shirou, but to those who do, Shirou is the protagonist of Fate Stay Night, the original series of the Fate franchise. Shirou is a loved but at the same time controversial character due to the fact that mainstream anime adaptations fail to capture his character properly, most often as a result of a lack of sufficient monologue to allow the watcher to truly sink into his shoes. However, I'll delve into more detail with that later since this video is going to be a huge one anyways, so strap in. Regardless, let's begin with the character and backstory. Shirou Emiya was originally a normal child living in Fuyuki with parents unknown. He lived a normal childhood, but that changed during the Fourth Holy Grail War, where the war resulted in the Grail's corrupted contents spewing out onto Shinto, starting a massive fire that destroyed the city. Shirou's parents were both killed in the accident, with Shirou himself sustaining large burns and injuries from the wreckage and his surroundings. Little Shirou walked aimlessly despite his injuries, trying to escape the fire. He saw people dying from the flames and wreckage, yelling at him to help them, save them, but he intentionally ignored them in order to preserve his own life. He believed that he was in a literal hell, and that he was going to die there. This would later bite him back, however, as he would heavily regret these actions for the rest of his life. Luckily, soon as the fire began to die down, a nearly broken Kiritsugu found Shirou in the wreckage, faintly clinging to life. Desperate, Kiritsugu implanted King Arthur's scabbard Avalon, which was said to always protect its user into the dying Shirou. This helped heal Shirou and help him live, while having the side effect of literally changing Shirou's fate from the root and modifying his origin to sword. To know what the root is, I highly recommend you check out Chaldea Guru's video in the description to get a better idea about what it is, since it's a very long story on its own. And an origin is basically a concept that defines your existence and influences your life's occurrences and choices. Upon seeing Kiritsugu's face of relief from saving him, he began to look up to the man who was able to find joy from saving others. He would later intentionally become adopted by Kiritsugu, and begged for his father to teach him magecraft, to which he eventually caved in and did. But Kiritsugu didn't properly teach Shirou, making Shirou's magecraft technique very dangerous and unorthodox. Shirou's reasoning to learning magecraft was in order to better help others, as a large burden he took from the fire was the survivor's guilt of being one of the only people to make it out of the fire. This made him feel undeserving of his own life, and made him want to prioritize others' lives before his own, and become as useful as he could to save as many people as possible, as otherwise it would be unfair that he survived when so many others died. On the night that Kiritsugu would pass away, he told Shirou about how as a child he wanted to become a hero of justice, a person that would save others with his own life, and that he wished he could have achieved it. To Shirou, this was strange, as in his eyes, Kiritsugu was the definition of one, not realizing Kiritsugu's views and true life experiences. Despite this, Shirou confidently promised to Kiritsugu that he would become one in his place, to which Kiritsugu smiled at, allowing him to pass away in peace, with his biggest regret fulfilled. Years later, Shirou would be dragged into the Fifth Holy Grail War after accidentally witnessing a battle between servants, eventually causing him to summon his very own, the saber-class servant that would be revealed to be Artoria Pendragon later in the story. He learns the basics of the war through Rin, before going to the church where he meets Kirei Kotomine, and learns that his traumatic past was from the result of the Fourth Holy Grail War. In fear of allowing the same thing to repeat, as well as to fulfill the role of a hero of justice, Shirou decides to fight in the war, and pledges to keep the Grail from the hands of those who would abuse its power. From here, the story of Fate Stay Night splits into three routes. and his story diverges into 3 different possibilities with progressing levels of character development and growth. In the Fate route, Shirou stays adamant with his choices to protect others at the cost of his own life, going so far to protect Artoria in combat as Shirou unknowingly already cared for her. In this route, he doesn't develop much from a character standpoint, as the Fate route is about following oneself as an ideal. As such, Shirou throughout the route is steadfast and dead set on living up to his own ultimate expectations, to become a hero of justice to save others. He begins to learn the powers of projection and is able to project Caliburn, Artoria's original sword, from his connection with her, but never truly becomes adept with his magecraft. In this route, he experiences more and more battles with Saber, learning more about her as a person and as a friend. He begins to find himself more and more enamored with her as they spend more of their time together, and he begins to not only feel an affinity for her, but also find her very similar to himself as a person. He slowly learns through his dream connections to her about her past, and learns that her goal for the Grail is to erase her past life. Shirou gets frustrated at her views on herself and the people that surrounded her back then. Shirou knew that her life was full of wrongs, but what she needed to do wasn't to go back and redo it, but to accept it and move on. Through this, he learns that merely helping someone and truly saving someone were very different things. And while he had helped Saber on many occasions, he had never been able to truly get close to saving her. He later gets into a fight with her after confronting her with her goals and how she saw her ideals. But later at night, he eventually manages to crack her exterior in a near-fatal fight against the servant Gilgamesh. He realizes in this moment that Saber had filled a gap in him since the fire, and her mere existence had helped him fill his emptiness in life, and gave him reason for his own sake. Despite being gravely wounded, he fights Gilgamesh knowing he could die, and confesses his feelings to her in the battle. After that, he continues to do his best to convince Saber to move on from her past and live a happy life. Before the end of the route, Shirou successfully saves her soul, letting Artoria finally accept her fate and move on to become her own person. However, at the end of the war, they learn of the Grail's corrupted state, and ultimately choose to destroy it. Shirou is pained heavily in doing so, wanting to let her stay by his side and live a happy life, but he accepts that such a thing cannot happen, so he orders Artoria to destroy the Grail as promised. The two then share a peaceful moment at sunrise, where Artoria confesses her mutual love for Shirou and disappears, both silently promising to see each other again one day. After the route, Shirou would continue to pursue her, while continuing to strive to his goal of being a hero to save other people, and help them smile as he did for Artoria Pendragon. In the Unlimited Blade Works route, however, instead of being allowed to pursue his ideals, Shirou is truly confronted by them in the form of Archer. It is established early that Shirou has disagreements in the way they see things. While Archer is cold yet sensible and logical, Shirou was idealistic and driven by his own moral compass and trauma, even if it wasn't a choice that most would make. In this route, Shirou and Archer have constant tension with each other simply because of the different ways they perceive things, and after an attack on Castor, Archer actually attempts to kill Shirou, forcing Rin to bind him by a command seal not to attack him. Shirou, on the other hand, found a strange affinity and attraction to Archer's fighting styles, as well as his swords. During a fight against Castor and Castor's master, he projects solid versions of the swords for himself and uses them to fight, basing his technique off Archer's fighting style. This later injures him and leaves him numb on his left side. However, Archer mysteriously knew exactly what was wrong with Shirou and how to fix it, saying that he experienced the same thing in his past. When Shirou loses Saber to Castor from her noble phantasm, Shirou is left gravely wounded and Rin and Archer go to fight on their own. Shirou realizes at her house that Rin was the one who saved him after he witnessed the battle between servants before the war, and realizes his feelings for her. Because of that, he follows her to the church, and saves her in the nick of time, letting the two escape. Rin vents her insecurities and her disappointment of herself, and Shirou reassures her confidence, while confessing his own feelings to her. This allowed Rin to confide in him, and reignite her own self-confidence as well. After they defeat Castor, Archer continues to attack Shirou despite betraying Castor, realizing that his ulterior motive was to escape Rin's command seal in order to kill Shirou. Shirou realizes that as they are, they cannot accept each other, as their ideals and views are complete opposites. Archer reveals Unlimited Blade Works, a reality marble representing his life, with imagery of that of a machine, a blade factory, in a cloudy landscape with little vision, filled with swords. The symbol he has as a heroic spirit is this horrid imagery that represents his own affinity to swords, and his ability to analyze and project them. However, this reality marvel fades due to his lack of mana, and he escapes with Rin as a hostage so that Shirou would challenge him. Shirou accepts the challenge, realizing Archer's identity. His suspicions are confirmed when Archer reveals his identity as Emiya, an alternate version of Shirou that became a guardian in order to become a hero of justice. However, he was betrayed by his own ideals in the end, and thus lives in a perpetuating endless hell of killing, regretting all his life decisions and choosing to kill Shirou until he erases his own existence. Acknowledging this, Shirou engages in a duel with Archer in order to both reach his goals, but also to prove whose life ideology was more correct. In this duel, Shirou constantly learns from Archer's movements and projections, improving every second to catch up to his skill and projection efficiency. Through his interactions with Archer through the route, he becomes more and more aware of Archer's past and his experiences, almost assimilating them due to being the same person. In the fight, Shirou constantly questions himself as he learns more about Archer's prowess and past, and is faced by the truth of the situation that Archer went through. However, Shirou recalls back to his past and what happened in the fire. He realizes that his goals are next to impossible, hypocritical, full of flaws, and that his past was likely going to end in betrayal. Despite this, he believed in them and continued to strive to his goal of being a hero of justice, as his dream was not a mistake, as his ideals were just and pure, and that he would fight regardless to strive for a better world. Archer, after experiencing his conviction and remembering the same feelings, finally accepts Shirou's path, as well as come to terms with his own fate. He gets stabbed by Shirou, showing that Shirou had become the victor of the ideals. Shirou would later showcase his full prowess that he obtained against Gilgamesh, using his ability to project noble phantasms and raw eyes in a similar proficiency to Archer, as well as use his own version of unlimited blade works with the help of Rin's mana, this time with a clear sky at twilight, with an infinite horizon, showing that his mind was clear, and no longer had any doubts or worries with his goals. He uses his abilities to defeat Gilgamesh, and after the Grail War, goes on with Rin to the Clock Tower to study magecraft with her, and continue to pursue his life to become a hero of justice. Whew boy, that's a lot already, but we aren't done yet. Finally, we have the Heaven's Feel route, and here we see Shirou forced to come to terms with his ideals and choose whether they are worth upholding when a grim reality works against them. Here, he is unable to form an alliance with Rin due to a fundamental disagreement, which itself shows that Shirou's decisions are slightly off in this route. In this route, Shirou quickly forms a strong bond with Ilya, stronger than their relationships in other routes, while playing with her and accompanying her in the city, but more importantly, becomes increasingly worried about Sakura as her physical state was steadily decreasing. This was also because of the fact that not only was Shinji a participant, but the Matos were a line of magi. Meanwhile, Sakura sustaining heavy fevers and often collapsing, making Shirou make her stay at his house and care for her, deepening their bond. He also learns from Kirei about Kiritsugu's nature in the past, and how being a hero of justice meant ultimately sacrificing the needs of the few when needed. Later, Kirei soon informs him that the Grail War is going horribly wrong, with servants mysteriously disappearing. Shirou exchanges information with him, learning of Zoken's worm magecraft and his true nature as a person that feeds on others for his own body. Later in a battle, Shirou loses Saber to the Shadow. As he realizes about her loss, he mourns, and realizes that he is truly alone to fight from now on, hammering in the true gravity of the situation. He is told Sakura was raped in the past, yet kept a smile up for him. He is pained by his own naivety when he realizes that he merely accepted Sakura's smiles and kindness, being unaware of the darkness she held of being a magus and of her own abuse. When he learns of her state, Shirou is left conflicted. He remembers that he became a magus in order to help people. His entire life was dedicated to saving others. He wanted to become a hero of justice. But in this moment, could he hold that ideal up? Could he give up Sakura in order to continue being a hero and protect others? Of course, it was too difficult to choose. In this moment, he would be visited by Ilya, who showed kindness to him in his moment of uncertainty, telling him that she would be his ally no matter what, and protect him, as people should protect the ones that they love. Her words and actions are what break down the wall that Shirou had kept up for himself, he lets go of that vision of protecting everyone, and decides to instead protect Sakura, the person he cared for. With no more regrets, he continues to protect Sakura, even though her existence was a risk to others as she was under Zoken's absolute control. Even though killing her would be an act of mercy to put her out of a misery she never deserved. Shirou puts aside his ideal as a hero of justice for everyone, and even when Sakura herself told him to give up on her, he embraced her, and told her that he would become her hero, telling her that he loved her. Later, Shirou is forced to confront the shadow again when it attacks Ilya's castle, this time having to battle the same saber he fought with, who had been darkened by the Grail. In the battle, Berserker is swallowed, Archer is mortally wounded, and Shirou loses his left arm protecting Ilya. To save Shirou's life, Archer tells Kotomine to give his arm to Shirou, resulting in Shirou being implanted with Archer's arm. He learns that while the arm saved his life, he could also be killed by it, as it was the limb of a heroic spirit, which a normal human mind cannot comprehend or use properly. Made even worse since Archer had unlimited blade works, while this Shirou did not have the same capabilities as the Shirou in the previous route. So if he used it, his mind and body would eventually be swallowed by it. Thankfully, it was suppressed by the Shroud of Marten, which suppresses the effects. He later learned of Sakura's state as the Shadow, and that she was becoming a Holy Grail herself, and that people would die if she were left to live. Shirou is once again conflicted on whether to kill Sakura, remembering that he wanted to save people, but was ultimately unable to do so, deciding to give up on his ideals there, and protect Sakura no matter the cost. When Sakura falls prey to her own inner demons, converts into Dark Sakura, and kidnaps Ilya, Shirou remains steadfast into protecting those he loves, even from themselves. He worked with Kirei to save Ilya, and in the escape, he faces a corrupted Berserker. He removes the shroud from Archer's arm, making use of its projection abilities and blueprints in unlimited blade works at the cost of letting it invade his own body. He sees a vision of Archer as he begins to break, quickly regaining himself and surpassing his limits, breaking reality and possibilities to protect Ilya. He regains his footing, tracing the same axe sword that Heracles uses, and activates 9 lives blade works from the blade. Using the technique to strike 8 lethal blows at Berserker, he nearly fails, but Ilya being present managed to delay Berserker's reaction, allowing for Shirou's victory of a battle that lasted mere seconds in real time, resulting in Shirou to be more proficient with projection, ready to use projection later on to fight the next day, even if he may die when doing so. Shirou encounters Saber Alter again, and fights her with the help of Rider. They battle, Rider holding her off but giving in slowly. He removes the shroud again in order to project, and his important memories begin to disappear, but his support allows Rider to win. He then musters all the courage he can and kills Saber in order to fight on. He reminisces on the many times that she was with him, a beloved ally, a trusted sword. He recognizes that he chose this path in order to protect those he loves, and shoulders the burden as he proceeds into the cavern where Sakura and the Grail lay. Upon seeing a scared Sakura with powers reaching out of control, he traces Rulebreaker to free Sakura from Angra Mainyu. At this point, every second he forgets more. He barely remembers any of his friends, but remembers his goal for coming here, and those that he cares for. Finally, he duels against a quickly dying Kirei, who guards the evils of the world. With swords bursting out of his body since he arrived in the large cavern, they battle, eventually ending in his victory. He goes to destroy the Grail, but is interrupted by Ilya, who he became very close with throughout the events of the war. He can't remember anything about her other than the fact that she was precious to him, and didn't want her to continue. Ilya tells him that she'll close the gate for him and help him live again, as she told him that older sisters need to protect their younger brothers. He finally says her name, as Ilya sacrifices herself to close the gate and perform an imperfect usage of the third magic, Heaven's Feel, in order to save Shirou's soul. Shirou's soul eventually gets put into a puppet made by a certain famous puppet master of the Nasuverse. We'll talk about her later. She shares a birthday with me, after all. Shirou, who did his absolute best to protect those that he loved, finally reaches a happy end with Sakura. Finally, we return to the original Shirou, a Shirou after the Fate route that continued following his ideal, while still searching for Artoria. Shirou went through many trials in life, able to be interpreted in the form of experiencing everything he did in the other routes and more, representing Shirou through all of his hardships and lessons, as he becomes a successful hero and lives up to his own ideals and life lessons, but was never repaid for them, which he accepted. Until his dying breath, he continued to save while searching for Artoria. One day, he awakens in a beautiful forest, with blue skies, green grass, warm sunlight reaching through the leaves. He notices an opening and sees something that he longed for. He felt young. He felt unfit. But he felt like how he was during their time. He reunites with his beloved saber, Artoria, telling her that he was finally home, and the two embrace. After an eternity, after hardships and life lessons, they were finally together again, in their eternal utopia. Shirou is a kind person, always helping others, always protecting them, and always doing what he believed to be right. Due to his PTSD and survivor's guilt, he believes he shouldn't be alive. Combined with seeing how his savior was so happy in saving him, made him strive to be a hero to protect others. In some timelines he does it successfully, others his ideals deviate, but they always stick to protecting others. Shirou's growth as a person grows more and more human and mature as the roots progress, with development spanning through the roots themselves. In the Fate route, we are introduced to him. He's like a child, naive, full of delusions that he will fight for. In Limited Blade Works, he begins to confront the ideals and question them, before truly proving to himself why they are worth holding up, and going on that path with no more doubts. Finally with Heaven's Feel, where he is able to finally let his delusions go despite all that he's been through in order to protect those he loves. Shirou develops an insane lot through the roots, and his growth is never complete until you witness all three roots in their intended order. Now in terms of abilities, Shirou is actually a third-rate magus due to Kiritsugu's teaching being intentionally unconventional so that Shirou wouldn't pursue the same path that he did. However, due to his unique origin, he developed very special niche abilities that only he can use the way he does. Remember, his origin is that of Sword thanks to Avalon being implanted in him to save his life. As I said, an origin is basically the concept that drives your own fate and destiny, personality, and choices you'll have in life. For instance, a sword is a tool to be used by people, which reflects how Shirou acts and wants to be a tool to others, to save others. This origin also gives him a large affinity and attraction to swords, and allows him to use them in his magecraft. Originally, Shirou mastered Projection Magecraft, also known as Gradation Air. His projections used to be hollow and only imitate the shape of an object. Because of that, he was taught Strengthening Magecraft instead, which while simpler, is considered to be far more useful. With it, he is able to increase the properties of certain things. This includes making objects stronger, making his eyes see farther, as well as analyze the object completely. He is also skilled at Structural Grasp Magecraft, which allows him to see these analyzed objects like a blueprint. During the 5th Holy Grail War, he learns to properly project things through various means, and he learns a more specialized version of projection known as tracing, that copies everything including the concept of the object and its existence, allowing him to copy the powers of even noble phantasms, as shown when he uses 9 Lives Blade Works, which is an application of the noble phantasm 9 lives that he obtained through the use of Heracles' axe sword. He is especially good at projecting Sword Zuta's origin. Through this, he can project things through imagination as long as he can understand the object, and can theoretically create his own weapons, as Archer does with Calabog and Kurunting. The notable weapons that he uses are Caliburn, which he obtained through dreams and his link with Artoria, his twin swords Kansho and Bakuya, which are his main weapons of choice, and Avalon. As he was implanted with this since he was young, he has an affinity to it, and can even project it. He has above average healing thanks to Avalon, specifically with a link that he has with Artoria as his servant. In times of large trauma or major injuries, however, the healing mysteriously takes the form of replacing his flesh with layers of sword blades, knitting up his wounds to heal under a quicker time span. However, this could also backfire, as too big of an injury can make so many swords that they could burst from inside him, killing him. We later learn that most of these abilities were other applications of his own reality marble, Unlimited Blade Works. As a reality marble often represents, it is the inner world of himself that represents his origin of sword, how he was saved by the scabbard of a sword, how he would live as a sword for others. Shirou's version is the appearance of a desert covered with swords extending to the horizon, with a clear orange sky at twilight to symbolize his lack of doubts and free convictions. he is able to instantly trace and replicate swords in it, as well as summon them to his side immediately, or just throw them at his opponent from thin air. He can also trace other weapons like axes, shields, and spears, but at a lower quality compared to swords. Also, he cannot replicate modern weapons like guns. Unlimited Blade Works is a very straightforward, but also a very effective reality marvel in certain circumstances, and can easily dispatch an army. In Heaven's Feel, he has Archer's Arm, which is also referred to as an artificial phantasm. As stated before, it would swallow Shirou due to Shirou not being compatible enough with the arm at the time, with Unlimited Blade Works forming inside his own body rather than outside it, literally tearing him from the inside out with swords. However, thankfully it is suppressed by the Shroud of Martin, which cuts off the magical circuits so that won't happen. However, even with the Shroud on, it still allows Shirou to tap into Archer's physical capabilities and strength passively, allowing him to pull off feats he usually wouldn't be able to, like jumping out of the Ironsborn castle at a high place and surviving with basically no injuries. Overall, he's a really niche magist, but a good fighter. He is far from the most powerful being in the Nasuverse, but he has unique abilities that give him a ton of versatility with Unlimited Blade Works, and has so much lore that gives him room for said abilities, so it feels very natural. As for my own thoughts on the character, I honestly didn't like him when I first watched Unlimited Blade Works for the first time. Then I watched Dean Stay Night and read the visual novel. If you didn't notice, I didn't go into too much detail into everything he did in each route, and that's because of two reasons. One is time, and the other, and the far more bigger reason, is because I wanted to specifically showcase Shirou's development as a character, and his true thoughts that is often misinterpreted or misunderstood by a considerable fraction of people. Shirou is far from a bad character, but a lot of adaptations fail to convey his thought process and growth to a satisfying degree, leaving him feel like a whiny, unreasonable character when he's far from that. Shirou is a character I find to be heavily misunderstood by a lot of casual viewers, including me when I was one of those people. So I understand where people are coming from. Still, I do believe that Shirou is undeserving of his negative reputation just because the mainstream adaptations do not capture the entire character as well as the visual novel does. And it's a real shame how many people write him off for being stupid and naive because of that. Regardless, once I understood his story and got to experience the character properly, I can now say that he's one of my favorite characters in Fate, and definitely up there for one of my favorite protagonists of all time. His sheer development, not in a specific route, but throughout all three of the routes, was insane, and made me understand his character through every point of scenario. I could at least empathize with him when something came up, which I find is a huge strength in Nasu's first-person writing style. His events and story are grand and large, with a ton of thought and factors put into building his character through the different routes. I love him, and I definitely think he's a great protagonist in Type Moon. However, despite saying all that, with his crazy life and ideals as well as his growth, he is not my absolute favorite protagonist in Type Moon. That spot belongs to my favorite character in all of the Nasuverse. But we'll talk about him in another video. For now, I hope you enjoyed my Type Moon character showcase on Shirou Emiya. It was a lot of work, and while it's only the second episode, I can already tell that it's going to be one of the bigger episodes in the series. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed, and I urge you to watch the previous and future episodes of the series in order to learn more about the Nasuverse and its many works, as they're all interesting, well written, and deserve your recognition. Until then, farewell. I'll see you in the next Type Moon character showcase.